Welcome to In the Studio, with a 21st century perspective on history's greatest rock albums.
Guitar up. 1, 2, 3.
I'm Redbeard, and today in the studio, it's the 30th anniversary of what could be the biggest comeback album of the 80s.
With 90125, we were cinema at that time, and John came in and it changed the whole validity of it, really, in so many ways. Because, you know, John has the unique voice of the band, and really, it's, you know, that's what it is. That's really when it becomes Yes, too.
The sound of Yes's harmonies is not John, it's John and Chris. And the others try, get involved, but really no one else can sing. It's really John and Chris's voice that make the difference.
I think we were always into sort of uplifting music. You know, I personally, I didn't follow the Stones into their satanic realm. I followed the Beatles into All You Need Is Love.
I'm Tony Kaye of Yes, with Redbeard.
I'm John Anderson of Yes, with Redbeard.
I'm Alan White of Yes, with Redbeard.
This is Trevor Rabin of Yes. You're in the studio for 90125.
The winter of 1984 marked the reincarnation of one of rock's most enduring bands. The history of Yes is now over 4 decades long. It's a complex saga with an ever-changing cast of extremely talented musicians, all orbiting like electrons around the nucleus of Yes vocalist John Anderson and Yes bass player vocalist Chris Squire. Since they first formed Yes way back in 1968, there have been at least a dozen different Yes lineups, almost double that many individual members, counting touring musicians. But by 1980, even Chris Squire, the one musician to have played on every Yes album, Chris had had enough. Punk rock had found Yes's precious pomposity then to be irresistible as a target, and their public execution was mercifully swift. The story of Yes had finally reached its end. Or so it seemed. You see, 3 years later, Chris Squire, Yes drummer Alan White, and original Yes keyboard player Tony Kaye were 9 months hard at work into recording a new band that they called Cinema, with songs written by South African singer-guitarist Trevor Rabin, when a chance meeting with original Yes vocalist John Anderson at the 11th hour changed everything. Here's original Yes keyboard player Tony Kaye with John Anderson in the studio.
Just like he appeared during the 90125 album.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I think in many ways we kind of stumble along.
It's true. Looking for an opening.
Looking for an opening.
It's like getting a table in a restaurant.
I don't think anyone really thinks about it. It's not like, the phone calls are made.
Yeah,
and
it would never happen.
It would never happen like that. It has to happen by stumbling along and even if it's separately, to go through a period of writing music. And then somehow at the end of that period, just like it did in 90125 and probably before in certain ways, different ways, it stumbles along to the necessary right conclusion.
Alan White replaced Bill Bruford on drums on the 1972 Close to the Edge Yes tour. When Yes broke up in 1980, Alan White and bass player vocalist Chris Squire kept in touch, working on new songs. And in 82, they almost formed this new supergroup that would be called Cinema. Here's Alan White.
We played with Jimmy Page for about 8 weeks. And we wrote about 8 songs, and Jimmy wrote some parts with us, but mostly the writing was being done by Chris and myself.
That's pretty scary stuff to think about. That's formidable. Alan White, Chris Squire, and Jimmy Page.
That's right. In fact, the music was great. I mean, they were just kind of demo types things that we were doing. But I think in the end, management got into it, and the whole thing dissipated and fell to pieces.
That's a shame.
Which is when Atlantic Records... they called someone from Atlantic Records, called up and said, we have this guy, Trevor Rabin, who we think you might be interested in playing with. And they flew him to England. And we just had one jam, really, in Chris's basement studio, and it was starting to sound real good. And that was the real birth of what was going to be called cinema.
In early 1983, guitarist, singer, songwriter Trevor Rabin was, in everyone's estimation, a star in the making. A native of South Africa, Trevor's father was a violinist in the Johannesburg Symphony. Trevor Rabin moved to London in 1978, worked with Jack Bruce and Ray Davis of the Kinks, eventually hooked up with Chris Squire, Alan White, and Tony Kaye for cinema. An example of just how talented Trevor Rabin appears on 90125 in the song Leave It.
Leave It was something really that Chris and I, we arrived at a studio in the middle of 90125 to do a drum track on a certain song, and we just couldn't get a decent drum sound. And we had 2 weeks booked, and we thought, well, what are we going to do? We can't cancel, we're going to get cancellation fees, we've got to stay here. So I sat at the piano, and Chris came and sat around with me, and we wrote Leave It. The reason the vocals turned out the way they did is because we did the vocals before anything else. So we spent a lot of time doing an a cappella thing, and there was a lot of thought whether we should just keep it a cappella or bring in the instruments, but we obviously, it turned out we brought them in. But on the B side of the single, it is a cappella. There's a funny story with that.
What about it?
We'd finished all these vocals. It was just Chris and I that did all the vocals. There was something, I think there was 24 voices, which we'd done. That's how many voices are on that.
But from two people?
From two people.
By multi-tracking?
Multi-tracking. And the engineer wiped it.
What?
By mistake.
He accidentally
wiped. What he did was he wiped the click track.
The reference.
So the reference metronome, so that we could put any kind of sequencing or machines on it. So we had to lay down a new one, and there wasn't. Today you can deal with that, but then we couldn't deal with it, and we took the vocals, put them in a Fairlight computer, and I just played the vocals off the computer in time with a new click track, which took ages. We then felt that at the end of it, it didn't feel human enough, so we redid all the vocals again on top of those. So what you have on the record is a combination of the machine with our voices on, and what this machine does is it takes the voices and you play them, but it is the voice. It's not a facsimile, it is the actual thing.
Wow, amazing. All 24 voices are actually just Trevor Rabin and Chris Squire on Leave It from the album 90125 by Yes. Up next, Trevor Rabin, Tony Kaye, and Alan White will be joined in the studio by Yes lead singer John Anderson to recall how the band Cinema went from full screen to high definition. Don't miss John Anderson and a boatload of progressive rock favorites on the Progressive Nation at Sea cruise, sailing the Caribbean February 2014. For more details, visit progressivenationatsea.com. I'm Redbeard in the studio for the 30th anniversary of 90125 from Yes.
I'm Alan White of Yes with Redbeard.
I'm John Anderson of Yes with Redbeard.
I'm Tony Kaye of Yes with Redbeard.
This is Trevor Rabin of Yes. You're in the studio for 90125.
Thank you all. It is indeed the 30th anniversary of the biggest Yes album, 90125. When Chris Squire, Trevor Rabin, Tony Kaye, and Alan White started recording in the fall of 1982, let's be totally clear about this, it was a new band called Cinema. 9 long months later, with Cinema and the album almost finished, a chance meeting occurred in a pub between Chris Squire and his old mate John Anderson, who had just heard that Squire's new band was recording some interesting new things. Out of courtesy and friendship, Chris Squire invited John Anderson down to the studio to hear the almost completed Cinema album. That was summer 1983. I asked keyboard player Tony Kaye and John Anderson to recall what happened next.
Shock. Oh, it's him again.
It was a shock to the system. It was a shock to the system. Him again. It's so natural and so obvious, that it's not a shock at all. It happened with 90125. We were Cinema at that time, and John came in, and it changed the whole validity of it, really, in so many ways. Because, John has the unique voice of the band. And really, that's what it is. That's really when it becomes Yes, too.
Another terrific Trevor Rabin song from the Cinema Sessions that, with the addition of John Anderson's signature vocal, changed into the undeniable sound of Yes on the album 90125. Here's drummer Alan White.
We were going to play new music, a new direction, but you still had the rhythm section from Yes, so you're going to have overtones of the band within that sound anyway. And the idea was to create this new band and kind of switch gear, as it were. And only after we'd laid down like 3/4 of the tracks that you hear on 90125, the backing tracks, and Trevor was actually thinking about starting to get into put vocals on, and harmonies were being worked out, that Chris met John and in a pub, I believe, somewhere, and John said, "I've heard you doing some really good work. Maybe I could sing on a track." So John came down and tried singing on a track.
And the initial thing was just maybe one song, right?
Yeah. It sounded so much like Yes, you couldn't call it anything else. So you really had to think about reverting back the other way and saying, well, it sounds like a new Yes.
Yes co-founder and lead vocalist John Anderson.
What I've always said, that Yes is something that hovers above the collective unit and keeps us in tow, keeps us working hard, and keeps our spirits in the right direction in order to make good music with a defined idea, and not to just jump and try to make a hit single. The single market is very, very difficult to understand, difficult to ascertain. You know, 1 minute you're major famous and the next minute you're nothing. I'd rather make 10 good albums than one hit single. You know, it's one of those things that when the Yes idea first came, we would talk only album music.
But let's remember, when John Anderson suddenly showed up after Cinema's 9 months of recording, all of these musicians had a history together as Yes, all except one, Trevor Rabin, and it was Rabin's songs that were being recorded.
There was parts of it which I felt were a little peculiar, because I was just so unaccustomed to hearing John singing my songs, obviously. Then he sang Hearts, which is, I think, the last track on the second side, and I really liked it. And we spoke, and he joined the band, and only at that point, which was, you know, out of 9 months, was the last month of the album, and that was at which point we called the band Yes.
Coming up next, Tony Kaye, Alan White, and Trevor Rabin rejoin John Anderson in the studio. Follow In the Studio on Facebook, on Twitter at Redbeard Rocks, and for more, of course, you can visit inthestudio.net. I'm Redbeard. You're in the studio for the 8 million seller 90125 from Yes.
I'm Alan White of Yes with Redbeard.
I'm John Anderson of Yes with Redbeard.
I'm Tony Kaye of Yes with Redbeard.
This is Trevor Rabin of Yes. You're in the studio for 90125.
Thanks again, guys. Yes didn't even exist when the album 90125 was being recorded 30 years ago, and it took an outsider, Trevor Rabin, to provide most of the songs, and certainly what would turn out to be the key international hit for Yes. Here's Trevor Rabin in the studio.
Own of a Lonely Heart was something we never dreamed of doing. You know, I never thought of playing it to the band. It was a song I felt very strongly about, but I didn't feel it would fit in with, not the Yes thing, but just with who the guys were I was playing with. And I think it was Alan or Tony who heard it when I was rushing through some songs to play them, and they said, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's a song called Own of a Lonely Heart that I'd written." And they said, "Well, let's try it. Otherwise it wouldn't have been on the album."
Keyboard player Tony Kaye of Yes.
It was the same scenario for Own of a Lonely Heart too.
Yes, that went through quite a transformation, didn't it?
Well, it was on a tape of a lot of songs, and I will always remember because we were actually when Trevor and I first went to London, we were sharing a room at our manager's house because we couldn't find a hotel or something, and we were lying in bed listening to a lot of music, and I heard this thing. It was just like a few bars of this thing, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh no, it's a funk song that I wrote for someone." I said, "Trevor, we got to try this." And of course, he went through a lot of transitions, but he was going to skip by it.
And it's Yes drummer Alan White who confirms that Owner of a Lonely Heart was almost not even considered for the album.
It was the last song we listened to. It was completely the last song we listened to. We were putting all this other music down. I think Trevor was playing his tapes at home, and we were sat around the studio going, well, do we need something that's a little bit more like a single? And Trevor said, well, he said, I've got this song, but I never played it to anybody. I wrote it for somebody else. And Trevor played it, and it was almost instant. We put it down kind of really easily straight away, and then we got into doing all the crazy noises that you hear on it, and the samples, and the James Brown licks, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just great. It was just something that was obvious should be on there, and that proved to be the most successful single I think we've had for a long time.
The biggest hit Yes has ever had since Roundabout over a decade earlier, and they're only #1 in the U.S. That's Trevor Rabin's Owner of a Lonely Heart from the album 90125. The irony, then, is that because of 90125's enormous comeback, not one, but two full versions of Yes actually reappeared for a while, sustained major recording efforts, and toured into the 1990s as Yes simultaneously as another band, Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. Here's John Anderson.
Yeah, Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. It's like a firm of solicitors, you know.
Yeah, a law firm, right?
Yeah, you can't get a longer name than that.
No.
So it just seemed it was just a tag, really. But inside, you know, people would ask me, what do I do? And I say, I'm a musician, I work in a group. What's the group called? I'd always say Yes. The most important thing for me was seeing two sides of the coin. I had a 90125 big generator group, and which was and is an incredibly powerful unit with Alan, Chris, and Trevor, and Tony. And to work with Steve and Rick and Bill again, and we had Tony Levin on bass, there was a lot of finesse there. And in some ways, I could say, well, I miss the heaviness of Chris and Trevor and Alan. And then when I'm with Chris and Trevor and Alan, sometimes I miss a little finesse. It's just the way, the makeup of these musicians is extraordinary. And I was very fortunate to work with both teams. I saw in the audience appreciation, there was a more appreciation of the musicality of ABWH, whereas with the 90125 big generator, there was a really powerful rock and roll ism about the audience. They wanted to come and boogie, you know, they wanted to come and really get it together.
Trevor Rabin.
And on a production level, whether you like or dislike John's voice, one thing it does is, as far as direction, it allows you to delve into many different areas, sound-wise, arrangement-wise, because there's always that thread. Whereas with, without thinking of any bands in particular, there are bands where the vocalist hasn't got a distinctive sound. And the minute the music goes off into an area which is slightly different to what people are used to, the album will sound disjointed. So that's one of the luxuries of John's voice, is you can really screw around with the rest of it. And his voice, in mixing the album, I tried so many different things on his voice, but you never really notice them that much because the voice is so distinct. And once again, Chris is a very single-minded kind of guy, and he has very good ideas on the bottom end. And he has one thing I don't think people realize is how strong his voice, the influence of his voice, has been right from the start. The sound of Yes's harmonies is not John; it's John and Chris. And the others try, get involved, but really no one else can sing. It's really John and Chris's voice that make the difference.
Finally, is it any wonder that a group of musicians with such a collectively positive approach to music and life would have such an affirmative name for the endeavor as Yes? Here's Yes co-founder John Anderson.
I think we were always into sort of uplifting music. I personally, I didn't follow the Stones into their satanic realm. I followed the Beatles into All You Need Is Love. That was my dream. I loved it, and I tended to follow that train of thought. It's something, I think what Tony said earlier, we seem to, like a magnet towards, we're sort of driven to write this kind of music, and it's not even soul-searching. It's very spirited music in many ways, and very the love of life, the love and need for understanding, ecology, and you become part and parcel of the people. you're with the people, they want to hear their train of thought put into musical form. That's why they come and see a concert. And we need them to affirm that we're doing the right thing. And the word yes is that affirmation, and it's an umbrella in which we all survive.
It's, when Yes just doesn't play the blues. Never, just...
It's true, I've never had the blues, so I can't sing them. I've tried to sing them, but,
Sail into progressive rock history on the Progressive Nation at Sea cruise, February 14, when John Anderson and Transatlantic join forces for a very special performance of Yes classics. For more details, visit progressivenationatsea.com. This is Redbeard in the studio, thanking my guests Alan White, Trevor Rabin, Tony Kaye, and John Anderson. In the Studio is written and produced by yours truly, Redbeard, for Bearded Fish Productions, copyright 2013, all rights reserved. Transcription by Jane Carpenter Brunet, theme song by Andy Timmons. Follow In the Studio on Facebook, at Redbeard Rocks on Twitter, and for the biggest names in rock, visit inthestudio.net.